Hello lovelies, welcome back. I hope you're gonna enjoy this video. So in this video, I'll be doing my 3-month reading wrap up. And 3-month reading wrap up, I normally do like a monthly reading wrap up, but this time I was in a reading slump. In January, I read one singular book, which is the least amount of books I have read since 2020. This reading slump is beating my ass, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about all of the books that I read in those 3 months. We read some different genres, and I'm just gonna talk about all of them that I read because it's only 12 books. So I hope I can do this video quickly enough, and I, again, hope you enjoy. So let's get into the books. The first book that I read was on the 10th of November. So this is kind of when the reading slump got worse. And then in December, it got even worse. And then in January, it was the worst. I read The Ever King by L.J. Andrews. This is a fantasy romance, and I gave it 3.25 stars. So I did enjoy this, and I'm not sure if it's the reading slump or just my enjoyment and the enjoyability of the book in general. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I feel really conflicted about this book because on the one hand I really liked it, but then on the other hand I couldn't get through it. So basically, this land after a war was separated into the ocean and sea half and the land half, and the sea people cannot go on land. Now something happens that breaks that binding, that keeps it apart. So Eric, this fake king, comes and steals the princess of the land kingdom, I guess. So they have an enemies to lovers. She's mad at him, obviously, because he kidnapped her, but also she feels attraction, and also they have history. It's a perfect setup for a good book, but in the execution, didn't feel like much. The beginning of this was very confusing. There was a lot of name dumping and info dumping, so that was kind of, again, confusing, and it left me feeling rather dumb, but also I've heard other people say that they felt the same way. So it does make sense throughout this book, like they mention the names again, but the beginning felt a little bit unnecessary because I wanted to put it down right then and there because of the fact that I was so confuzzled. And I don't know if I will continue this series. It did end on a cliffhanger, so there was a little plot twist at the end, and I don't know if I'll continue the series. Am I really interested at the moment? No, but I will, I think, maybe reread this book to see if it is better when I read it again. It could have just been the time that I read it, you know? Like, maybe it is a really good book, but the time that I read it wasn't the right time for it. After that, I read a little book. I felt like I was slumping. I knew I was slumping, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get myself out of this slump and read a short book, which I read in the time span of one day. 24 hours. Death's Obsession by Avina St. Grave. This is basically a book where death is personified. So death is basically like haunting this girl Lilith. So Lilith had a near-death experience, and since then, death has been following her, and death has become obsessed with her. Strange things appear in her home. Strange things start happening in her dreams. She thinks she's hallucinating. So it's a romance between them. It's very short. It's less than 200 pages, so it was very easy to get through. The ending wrapped up way too quickly, so this could have been like 20 pages more, maybe even more than that. So I'm still very happy with this book. I gave it 4 stars, which a lot of people have different opinions about this book. They thought it was a little bit too weird, that it was too short that it should have been a full-length novel, but I personally really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for the length specifically, and I felt like this could have been a little longer, but it didn't bother me as much as it bothered other people, apparently. Then I read Wild Eyes in a reading vlog, which was, I think, finishing series that I was in the middle of. Yes, it was that series. I'll link it somewhere here up above. This was the only Elsie Silver book that I needed to read, and then I had finished her backlist once again. So I've read the Gold Rush Ranch series, the Chestnut Spring series, the first book in the Rose Hill series, and now I've also read the second book in the Rose Hill series. So the first book in the Rose Hill series is Wild Love. That is about Ford and Rosie is the male main character's sister in this book. So this is about Skylar, who's a country music star, and she's escaping from her family, basically, because she wants to record her own album, so she spontaneously decides to go to Ford, who owns a studio, basically, where you can record songs. So she decides to record an album with Ford's help. On the way to this small town, Rose Hill, she encounters a bear. So she's like filming the bear, she's posing with the bear, and West notices her and he's like, oh my god, this dumb bitch, what the fuck is she doing? So he saves her from a bear attack, which is very cute, very interesting way to meet each other, you know? And then turns out that she has to live on the land where West also lives. In that way, they start having a romance. West also has 2 kids, which they are the cutest freaking kids ever, but one of the kids, I don't remember her name, but she was talking like she was freaking 12 while she was 6 or something. So that was really, really unrealistic, and I didn't like that. It cringed me out. I ended up rating this 4 stars, which I didn't mention, actually. Which, it was a good book, but some things cringed me out. It was fine, but for a moment there, I thought this was going to be the first book by Elsie Silver that I would have to rate like 3 stars or lower. Thankfully, it changed up a bit towards the 1/3 mark, I think, like 1/3 of the way through. I was like, okay, this is getting better. So I ended up rating it 4 stars because it was a very enjoyable book. I did like the romance. The 3rd act's conflict did kind of anger me, but that was because of the situation that Skylar was put in, and not because of the fact that they handled it in a dumb way. I completely understand the thought process, completely understand why they did what they did. So it was a good book, but it is one of my least favorite Elsie Silver books, I think. Okay, now we have, again, a bit of a disappointing read, which is Pretty Rings and Broken Things by Kat Singleton. This is the 2nd book in the Black Tie Billionaire series. So the first book is Black Ties and White Lies, which I think I gave like 3.5 stars or 4 stars, something around that star rating. And I enjoyed it, and I heard people say that the 2nd book and the 3rd book are even better than the 1st book, so I had high hopes. I was like, okay, yeah, let's get into it, and I rated it 2.75 stars. I couldn't necessarily say that I didn't enjoy this, because I did enjoy it, but I couldn't get myself to rate it 3 stars. There were a lot of things that irked me, and that I was like, I don't really like this about the story, and this could have been left out, this could have been handled differently, but it was in there, so I was a bit disappointed by that. So I did give it a 2.75. And I also noticed so many things that were talked about in the beginning of this book, or like in the middle of this book, and then after book finished, I was like, wait, did we ever speak about this again? Or did we ever discuss this? And there were so many things that I was like, okay, you could have discussed this, you could have talked about this, because that is a very important part of the story that was mentioned, and it wasn't resolved or talked about ever again. So it felt a bit messy to me, and not like a very well constructed book. The Darkness Within Us by Trisha Levenseller. This was the one and only 5-star read in those 3 months of reading slumping. So this is the 2nd book in the Shadows Between Us series. It's also the last book in that series. Back when I first read The Shadows Between Us, this didn't have a title, this didn't have a cover review, and I was so unbelievably excited for this book. So, like 2-3 years later, it came out, and I didn't immediately grab it and read it because I was hesitant and apprehensive, because I didn't know if I would completely fall in love with this book. Surprise of all surprises, which is not really a surprise, I did fall in love with this book. I love Chrysanta. I love, I think his name was Eric's. There's like magical elements in this, because The Shadows Between Us, I wouldn't necessarily call it fantasy, but it's also, and I wouldn't call it magical realism, because it also isn't that, because there are magical elements, because the king is cloaked in shadows, and there's like demons at play and stuff, and there's also magical elements in this surrounding Eric's and what is going on with him, you know? But Chrysanta, she was a baddie. I loved her. I didn't expect to love her, because in The Shadows Between Us, she was kind of mean, but that all got explained in this book, which I thought, okay, it was kind of silly, honestly. Like, she could have been nicer, but she also admitted to the fact that she could have been nicer to Alessandra, the main character in The Shadows Between Us. It was not as good as The Shadows Between Us, which I did not expect it to be, but it was very good. It did give me those 5-star feelings, which I was very happy about, and I just treasure this series so much, and I love Trisha Levenseller. If you haven't picked up this book yet, and you were wanting to, do it, because it is very good. It is very good. And I've also heard people say that they enjoyed this one more than The Shadows Between Us, so maybe give it a shot. Maybe you can do that. In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. This is a little small town romance between a grumpy farmer and an influencer, which I love influencers in books, which I know a lot of people don't like that when this main character is a popular person, but I do love that. That's like my guilty pleasure, I guess, when they're like popular and they have a fan base. Evelyn, our main character, she goes to the small town to basically advertise this farm. So, and that is Love Light Farms, the farm that the main character lived on in the first book. There she notices like, oh, there's this guy that I had a one-night stand with. Okay, great. And that guy is Beckett. So the tension, very awkward. They're still like, okay, I am interested in you, you know, but I cannot do anything about it because that's just wrong. They part ways again. And then Evelyn gets burnt out, decides, okay, I'm gonna take a break and I'm gonna go to the place where I feel my happiest. So that place is Love Light Farms and this small town that Love Light Farms is set in. And there she bumps into Beckett again, and she moves into Beckett's house temporarily, like she has a separate room there, and that's where the romance happens. And I love how this small town romance and the small town setting had like a very tight-knit community. These random people in this town really cared about Beckett and his relationship with Evelyn. They made sure that Evelyn couldn't stay anywhere else, so she would have to move into Beckett's home. So forced proximity, lovely. And I really like this book, but the third act conflict really annoyed me. So it was a 3.5. It was good, but it could have been a 4-star if the third act conflict was handled very differently. It was a good book. For the rest, I really did enjoy it, but the third act conflict annoyed me. If you watched my December TBR, you would know that I put one book on my TBR where I was like, if I don't read this, I'm gonna fucking riot. And that book was Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochran? I honestly don't know how to pronounce her name, but Allison. So this is a Christmas book. It's sapphic, which I also really love. And even though I was in a reading slump, I still made time to read this book because I could not end the year without reading it. So I read this just before Christmas, which was very awesome, honestly, because the Christmas vibes were there, wintry vibes were there. This is about this girl, Ellie, and she starts this fake engagement with this guy. She goes to this cabin to meet his family, and there she meets his sister, and his sister is a girl that she had a fling with, that she was very much in love with. He's like, oh crap, she's shocked, and she's like, okay, she doesn't remember me, but this other girl, Jack, does remember her, but they are like, okay, we cannot tell the family about this because you're engaged to my brother. That's so awkward, and that's not gonna happen. So they keep it a secret that they had a fling. They're still very much attracted to each other. Jack is like, okay, you're engaged to my brother, even though they have a fake engagement, but she doesn't say that to her because she's not allowed to. It's an interesting dynamic. It is a very cute romance. There were some parts that made me kind of sad. I felt for these characters. So that is a good sign. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this, and I will definitely be reading more by this author. The Never King by Nikki St. Crow. This is a dark romance about Peter Pan. It isn't that dark. Like, I've read way darker, but it was still a darker book, I guess. This is, again, a Peter Pan retelling, and Peter Pan basically kidnaps these women every time a new generation turns 18, you know? So he kidnaps this girl, Winnie, and she's more fierce than the women that got kidnapped before, and there's a reason why she got kidnapped, which you'll find out. And Peter Pan is very morally gray, and it's also white shoes. So Peter Pan is not the only love interest. There's also this other dark dude, like, he has like this evil thing to him, I guess. And then we have these 2 lost boys, because we are set in Neverland. The romance isn't like that developed in this book, and I hope it gets more developed in the rest of the series, because I would really like to see more of these characters and this romance, because I was very invested, even though this didn't have a lot of plot and it didn't have a lot of substance. It felt pretty flat. So I did give it 3.25, but it was very enjoyable. But I didn't feel like I could rate it higher than a 3.25 because of the fact that it didn't have a lot of plot. Like, it did have plot, but also the plot was basic and there was not much depth. They could have gone way more in depth and it didn't, so 3.25, like, that's a fine rating, but I will definitely continue the series. Then I read Barbarian Alien. This is the second book in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. This is about Liz and Rahosh. It's about this alien dude and this girl. So a bunch of women were stranded on this planet with these aliens because they got kidnapped by aliens, but then they got dropped on this planet by other aliens. So they got rescued by these aliens, and basically these aliens need mates. Liz is this guy's mate, but she's like, oh, hell no, this ain't gonna happen. So she's not happy, so basically this guy, he kidnaps her until she submits to the romance. Liz is a fierce character. I liked her a bit more than the character in the first book, which was Georgie. She's like a huntress. She likes hunting. She likes doing these things that normally like the men would do on this planet. But then we also, in this book, like, there was a little bit of a bonus thing, which is called Ice Planet Honeymoon. I'm gonna get to that, but first, I had to read the honeymoon in this book, which is the first book in the series. Here it says that you can read this honeymoon story before Barbarian Alien, but you will get spoiled for some aspects of Barbarian Alien. So I didn't want to get spoiled, so I decided to put this down, and once I read Barbarian Alien, which I did, I would read this honeymoon story. And I enjoyed it. I didn't give it a rating because it was very short, but it was enjoyable, I guess. So, good for me. It did go into more depth than I was expecting. Like, when you hear honeymoon, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's gonna be fun. But there was a lot of grief involved, which, understandable, but also did not expect it in, like, a honeymoon story. And then I also read the little honeymoon story of this book. And this one was way more what I was expecting when I read the first honeymoon novella. This was just a fun time, silly, goofy, like they are hunting together, like this alien and Liz are hunting together. It's fun. It was fine. Again, didn't rate it because I didn't feel like I could rate such a short story. And then the last book, and the only book that I read in January, it's the 30th of January, by the way, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. So I gave this 3 stars. I had a hard time getting through this. First, it was because of the writing style. I had to do like a switch up because I was expecting an entirely different writing style. So for a while, I was like, okay, maybe I need to DNF this. I'm not going to do that right now, but maybe I need to DNF this eventually. But I got used to the writing style, and I actually found it very fun and very different than other books I've read. So I really enjoyed that. And there's also like a bit of a romance. It's very chill. It's like cozy fantasy, but there is some action aspects at the end of this story. I will definitely read the next book, but it's basically about Emily Wilde, and she is writing an encyclopedia of fairies. So she goes to this, I think, small town or something to discover more about the fairies there because she wants to find as much information about fairies as she can. She has a companion that also works where she works. So they together kind of explore the forest and explore the fairy and try to find anything that they can about the fairies. It was fun. It was fun, you know, but nothing really happened and I was a bit bored. It felt a little bit flat for me, so a 3-star felt like fair rating. But it's definitely more of a high 3-star than a low 3-star. So I would definitely recommend this book. And I will also definitely continue the series, but it just wasn't my favorite, you know. Those were, in fact, all of the books that I read in November, December, and January. I hope you maybe got some recommendation out of this. If you take any recommendation from this video, let it be The Darkness Within Us, okay? And if you haven't read The Shadows Between Us yet, go do that first, and then read The Darkness Within Us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, like and subscribe. And all my links are in the description, so if you want to have a look, go do that. And I hope I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.